A very warm welcome, Mr. Jeffrey Kripal. I'm super, super honored that you're on my podcast, and you are encouraging me to not be nervous, and I can't help but be a little bit nervous because I really love your work. I love your take. I listened to a bunch of your stuff. I have pretty much all of your books, and I haven't completely finished this one yet, but I'm loving it.
Okay.
I'll just read the introduction that you have on your website because not everybody will know you, of course. So I'm just going to read this intro, okay? So it says here, Jeffrey J. Kripal holds the J. Newton Razor Chair in Philosophy and Religious Thought at Rice University, where he served as the Associate Dean of the School of Humanities, chaired the Department of Religion for 8 years, and also helped create the GEM program, a doctoral concentration in the study of Gnosticism, esotericism, and mysticism that is the largest program of its kind in the world. He presently helps direct the Center for Theory and Research at the Esalen Institute in Big Sur, California, where he served as chair of board from 2015 to 2020. Jeff is the author or co-author of 13 books, 9 of which are with the University of Chicago Press. He has also served as the editor-in-chief of the Macmillan Handbook series on religion, 10 volumes. He specializes in the study of extreme religious states and the revisioning of a new comparativism, particularly as both involve putting the impossible back on the academic table again. He is presently working on a 3-volume study of paranormal currents in the history of religions and the sciences for the University of Chicago Press, collectively entitled The Superstory. So that's the bio of your website, and I'll probably ask you at the end to share a bit more about the Superstory, which sounds interesting. And maybe first to kind of become humans together. I, of course, did a bit of digging around, and your name stands out to me as for me, uncommon name.
Yeah.
Is it true that it means something around compassion?
Well, if you're Indian,
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to, yeah, there is a family story that the family was Roma, 3-4 centuries ago, and then converted to Catholicism, and we know the Roma came from North India, and there, Kripa would be compassion, or compassion would be a good translation. But I don't know if that story's true, by the way. Kripal, my family says Kripal, but other parts of the family say Kripal and Kripal, and it's all over the map. And it's obviously one of these Czech names that probably got changed over time. So that's why it's not. People confuse me sometimes for being some kind of Punjabi or Indian until they see me, and then they're like, "Oh, that looks very European. That looks very, very German or Czech or whatever it is."
Mm-hmm.
So that's the story behind the name, or one of the stories.
Yeah. That's cool. Yeah, thank you. And again, the intro, so people now have some idea of who you are, kind of, your professional bio. And again, to maybe paint a more human picture, I'm curious is there anything that most people don't know about you, but that you're willing to share as kind of, who is Jeffrey Kripal?
Well, so I said to you early on, I mean, I'm a casual kind of person. I grew up as a kid. I feel like a grown-up kid. I feel like I'm still 13 in an older man's body. I grew up in Nebraska, as we call it in the States. It's sort of in the Midwest. I grew up in a little town. Half my family are farmers. Half my family are small business owners. So I come from very simple background, as it were. I mean, I've spent my life in education, but that doesn't mean I'm elite or come from that kind of background. I just don't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you for that. And then something that you have shared about before is that you had this calling or this curiosity to become a monk, a Benedictine monk, I believe. Actually, I have a similar kind of fantasy, or if my life completely goes to smithereens, that's my backup plan. So kind of resonate. And at the same time, it is quite a mystical calling, it sounds like. And I'm curious, is that part of you, does it find a place in your life, or is it really just how do you relate to that now, to that calling? Or yeah.
Well, it was a very serious calling or vocation, and it was really my first calling. I spent 4 years in a Benedictine seminary, and the intention was to become a monk at the end. So that was from 18 to 22. And those were my early plans, a kind of religious life. And I got knocked out of that for various reasons. But those religious impulses really have never left me in terms of, seeking after something bigger than the human or bigger than um, a skill set or a job, as it were. So I definitely look at the history of religions, as I'm sure you're aware, in a kind of realist fashion, and so those spiritual instincts are still very much alive.
Mm-hmm. And I'm curious, does that kind of religious tendency or spiritual tendency also, does it have form in kind of practice that you do? Do you pray? Do you meditate? Or
I know. I get asked that a lot, by the way, Hans.
oh,
I mean, no. The answer is no. And the rationalization, but I also think it's very genuine, is that I think that I'm fundamentally about the future and not the past. And I
right.
don't think we have, well, I'm pretty sure what we call religion is about looking to the past. It's about revering somebody else's altered states. And I'm very much more about what our children or grandchildren or great great grandchildren are going to do or think. And I don't have a community or a tradition at the moment. Well, I haven't for decades, but I also don't seek one.
Hmm.
And it's because I think it's about the future and not about the past. To put it in a single sentence.
Yeah. That actually touches on something because, of course, you are a teacher of comparative religion or ancient religion. And I find that an interesting topic in itself. What is religion? And I found one quote that actually, not by you, but by Krishnamurti, that kind of touches exactly that question or intuition that I have. And I'll just read the quote. He said, so Jiddu Krishnamurti, when one loses the deep, intimate relationship with nature, then temples, mosques, and churches become important. And so my sense is, and I'm curious, of course, about your take, is that many of us in the West anyway have really separated from nature, separated from our deep self or source or whatever you want to call it. Do you think that the religious experience is somehow a calling from that wholeness, and then what do you think about that, and what do you think about the institutionalization of religion as a result of that? I love what you just said about we're revering somebody else's altered state, or I don't know exactly the words, but yeah, how do you relate to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, I think we need compassion here. First of all, our ancestors used this word religion, and I think it has all kinds of problems and, of course, all kinds of histories. But I do think that it's about this verticality. It's about having some kind of relationship to the broader universe or some kind of experience that is not normal, that is not ordinary. Um, and I think, well, I don't think, I think I know that religion is very much about this intergenerational transmission of of this verticality of these states. And so, you know, you have to figure out as a culture or as a community how to institutionalize the charisma of the founder. And you do that through scripture, you do that through architecture, you do that through art, you do that through ritual, you do that through mythology. You do it in a lot of ways, or at least human beings have done it in a lot of ways. And so I'm very sympathetic to that intergenerational wisdom and that need to pass on religious truth to one's children's and children's children. But on the other hand, religions change and our relationship to the universe changes, and we just know more today, Hans, than we knew 2,000 years ago or 3,000 years ago. We just know a ton.
Yeah.
And I want us to be honest about that. And I don't think we always are honest about that.
Mm-hmm. Was it you that said, speaking about this kind of, there's a kind of interplay at the background of this conversation right now about individual spirituality and a religious experience, and then how does that morph into this beautiful intention, or via this beautiful intention into institutionalized religion? Was it you, or am I confusing you with somebody else who said that almost something like churches are there to protect people from the religious experience? Was that you who said that?
It sounds like something I would say.
Yeah.
If you liked it, Hans, I said it.
Yeah.
If you didn't like it, I didn't say it.
Yeah.
No, I think one of the things I often observe is, but again, a lot of people have observed this, that religion, particularly temples, are about protecting one from the sacred.
Yeah.
They're more like nuclear power plants that are designed to use the energy, but also protect the people from the energy. And I think that a lot of religion is designed to protect us from an encounter with the sacred, which isn't entirely positive.
Mm-hmm.
It can destroy a human being as well as it can redeem a human being. So this idea that sacred experience or sacred encounter or religious experience is always positive, it's just nonsense. It's just not true.
Yeah.
And so I want to be really honest again about that complexity and about that protection from the sacred as well as access to it.
Yeah. That's very interesting to also compare to a nuclear power plant with this double function. Yeah.
And that's just a modern metaphor, right? It's just a modern comparison. But I do think once you see religion as a whole as both about access to the sacred, which it is, but also protection from the sacred, which it also is, then you have a much more honest and viable look at the history of religions.
Yeah. That's very interesting. And then, of course, it also comes with the danger of having human beings in the place of a lot of power through the ages. I know that Michael Taft, you've spoken to him at least once. He often speaks about the problem of having religious groups with a leader at the top that almost always goes badly. Yeah, you want to add something?
Well, the truth is that all of the religions, at least that I'm aware of, do begin with extraordinary human beings.
Yeah.
There are superhumans, as I call them, everywhere. And so I'm actually much more sympathetic to these superhuman experiences because I think they're at the core of our religions. Today, they do often go bad. It's true, but that's because of our moral and democratic instincts. I think it's not because that this access to the superhuman has ceased. Quite the contrary. And I don't equate access to the superhuman with moral behavior, by the way.
Yeah.
I just don't. And so I'm not surprised when things go poorly, actually, or don't go well.
Yeah. I want to touch a bit more on that part of maybe the darkness, not necessarily of religion, but also of human beings in those places. But also, human beings in places that kind of protect the current paradigm. And I'm not wanting to make it seem like there's only one paradigm and science is this one big block of, uniform scientists. Of course, that's not how it is. But there is, I think, a lot of shame that helps as kind of almost a dark protector of, well, there is a mainstream, of course, which is called materialism. And my question to you is, how do you have a perspective on shame as a mechanism in this whole field?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I don't use the word shame, but you could. I mean, it's perfectly valid here. This first of all, materialism really works well. I mean, there's a lot of benefits to it, and I think we want to, embrace it. But there's this strong distinction that I think should make between whether something's useful or adequate and whether it's entirely true or not. And I think those are two very different things. Something can be very much functional and adequate, but cannot speak to the full, truth of things. And I think materialism is like that. It's very, very powerful and very, very useful, but it can't speak to mind, as it were, mindedness. I think in terms of shame, what happens is people inhabit, say, a materialist or a secular worldview, and then they dismiss or demean people's experiences that are outside that paradigm. And they say, well, that didn't happen, or that's fraud, or that's a projection, or that's sleep paralysis, or they come up with, or that's hallucination, or that's psychosis. They come up with some explanation that returns it back to their worldview, that doesn't really work, but works for them. And I think once that shaming is distributed across a broad audience, which of course it is, you get this tamping down of these stories. But those stories or those experiences are always there, but they're repressed through this mechanism of shaming that goes on. And so I think that's very powerful. It's a kind of peer pressure it's a kind of social peer pressure that is very effective. Um, I talk a lot about the impossible, and what I mean by the impossible, of course, is it's not that it's impossible, but it's impossible by virtue of a particular worldview. It's dismissed or demeaned because of a scientific worldview, or it's literally demonized because of a particular religious worldview. But it happens all the time, regardless. So impossibility is really a function of our worldview. It's not a function of reality, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. You seem to take a kind of phenomenological approach that you don't necessarily interpret it. I think you said just now, actually, you said you don't belong to any specific group. Right. And it does seem that it's our interpretations that are dividing us. And one of the things I appreciate about you, and you may have not said it in those words exactly, but you don't take a stance, you don't take an interpretive stance, but you do say people have these experiences and they don't fit maybe this paradigm, but they have the experience. And I really like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think certainly what we've done certainly in the academy over the last 40 or 50 years is, certainly in the humanities, is we've stopped talking about reality. And we'll talk all day long about social reality or about society or historical context, but we don't talk anymore, or we shame each other when we want to speak about something that joins people together in a more universal or more global fashion. And I think the shaming is part of. I think humanists are really good at shaming one another, by the way.
Yeah.
And I think we shame other people too. It's not just each other. So I want to affirm this verticality, and I want to say, yeah, that is part of the human experience. But then what happens with religion is this horizontal dimension develops very quickly, and we start to exclude people. Human beings start to exclude people because of some vertical experience. They have an experience of God, say, or they have an experience of emptiness or ultimate reality. And then they want to say, well, you're not a Christian or a Jew or a Muslim, or you're not a Buddhist, or whatever you are not. And so you can be treated differently than people inside the fold, as it were. Yeah. So that to me is very troubling. And very obvious if you look at the history of religions. It's everywhere. It's a global phenomenon, that exclusivity, but also that verticality.
Yeah. Have you ever heard of nonviolent communication?
Well, I know, of course, about nonviolence or ahimsa from Mahatma Gandhi, but and Jainism in general, but I don't know. No, I have not heard about nonviolent communication.
Yeah, so it's a style or an approach to communication that I really like. I'm also a certification candidate in that school. It's originated by Marshall Rosenberg, and he did name it after Gandhi's approach of nonviolence. But Marshall Rosenberg's one of his main contentions was that violence becomes possible when we start labeling each other. That's not exactly his words, but it's exactly what you're saying to my eye. Yeah, I find it extremely interesting.
I mean, one way to think about that is, first of all, I can talk all day about ahimsa, in Jainism and Gandhi, but, um, small children do not hate. They have to be taught to hate particular people. They have to be taught that particular people are bad or are to be feared. So we teach our children hate. We teach them exclusion, and I think this gets back to this naming problem. We name people as particular kinds of people. I just think it's just wrong, just
Yeah.
morally wrong.
Yeah.
And it's part of why I refuse to identify with a particular religious group, by the way, because I don't know religious groups who don't name other religious groups. I just don't know of any. And the religious groups who don't do that, they tend to be very small and they tend to be persecuted, by the way.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. It's horrible. Yeah.
and Gandhi himself, of course, was killed, was
Yeah.
assassinated. And so ahimsa was not it was not a popular, or it wasn't something that won politically, although of course it did in some other ways. And it comes into ecology. It comes into a lot of intellectual movements as well. That I think are really based on a kind of nonviolence or a kind of non-duality at the end of the day.
Yeah. And I heard that when he was shot, I think he was shot twice in the belly, or I don't know exactly. But the only thing he said was something like Ram, 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 or something, the name of God, and then he died.
Yeah.
That's quite beautiful. I want to shift to what I would say is maybe kind of my core question, and I hope I can formulate it, which is to do with paranormal phenomena, which may not be as paranormal, of course, as we think.
Yeah.
And also the imagination. But first, for listeners that are maybe not super aware of your work or what do you mean paranormal phenomena, can we set the scene by maybe you have one example that is just so out there crazy of something that happened to somebody, but there's still no doubt for you that this happened to this person. Can you maybe just grab one example off the shelf of your mind?
I mean, there's so many. I mean, there's so many. Okay, I'm just thinking of Stuart Davis, who wrote about encountering an 8-foot tall mantis being. I mean, there's an example of something that makes absolutely no sense, but clearly happened to Stuart, and he writes about it and speaks about it, and I've written about it as well. So I mean, that's a good example of mantis beings and abduction experiences, and I mean, we could just go on and on. Precognitive dreams, we could near-death experiences. We could talk endlessly all day long about particular topics.
Yeah, it's really crazy, and well, it is crazy, but it seems to be true. And there seems to be so much true, like you just said, also telepathy and levitation. I've heard you speak on this podcast. I forget his name.
Joseph of Cupertino. Yeah,
I don't know, but yeah, maybe just
Carlos Iyer. Maybe I mean,
yeah.
he's a historian now at Yale who's written about levitation. I think in a really, really powerful way.
Yeah. Well, I have my own experiences in a way. My own father became psychic after the divorce with my mother. It was so traumatic for him, and I know that's a trope you're propagating. That trauma somehow unlocks this sometimes. So my father, he became psychic after the divorce of my parents. He could see where people are, ill in their body, and he could have, remote viewing, and he solved some police cases.
Wow.
But also, and speaking of levitation, a friend of mine, I won't name him, for privacy reasons, but he had several strange experiences, one of which he actually saw exorcisms where people were just banged about by whatever force. And the way that for me kind of cognitively unlocks that this is even possible is what you also describe in, among other places, the book The Flip, which is that somehow consciousness seems to be primary or primordial. And my own kind of approach to that worldview has been through phenomenology. I studied philosophy, I fell in love with phenomenology, and it basically takes the position that we need to take conscious experience as primary. We need to take it serious. And then, as to my view, this has been kind of done before in India, where they have the non-dual Advaita Vedanta, etc. And there's this core principle of Satchitananda. So reality is being, consciousness, bliss. So there's this intermingling into, to say technically, of epistemology and ontology. That was somehow my core learning of phenomenology. Are you with me so far?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. And so my question is, how do you relate the flip, this kind of taking consciousness or awareness as primordial? How do you relate that to questions about the imagination?
Mm-hmm.
What is that?
Yeah. So, okay. So maybe I'll sort of lay the groundwork here for the model. First of all, the paranormal is not normal. Okay. And the word itself, paranormal, was coined in 1903 in French. And it meant something like supernatural, 2 words. It did not mean supernatural, the Christian theistic category where the miracle is always from outside the natural world, is from above the natural. Paranormal meant that no, there's something natural happening, but it's super, it's beyond, or it's to the side of our present scientific models. So it was a naturalizing model. My own feeling about paranormal phenomena is that they're not normal because they're trying to get our attention. They're extreme. They're slapping us around and they're saying, hey, listen, look at me. But they're always speaking in code, and I think this is where people dismiss paranormal phenomena. They say, oh, well, Stewart didn't really have the experience of the mantis, or this precognitive dream was just a coincidence. Or, in other words, they reduce the imagination back to the imaginary. And they don't see that the symbolic code is the medium or the mode of communication between some other form of mind and our little mind, our little egos. And I think, so the imagination is, for me, the kind of key of the whole thing. And it's why paranormal phenomena are dismissed. But that's how they talk to us. And my basic argument is we should listen. Don't listen to what's happening. And by listening, I mean, first of all, take it as a real thing, but also don't do the religious thing. Don't do the contemplative thing where you say, oh, that's Makkya, or that's a bunch of siddhis, or that's, ignore that because that'll distract you from the path. I mean, no, that is the path. Somebody is trying to talk to us. It's probably us, by the way, with a capital U. And so we should listen. And so one of the things I talk about paranormal phenomena is I call them non-dual signals. They're on their way to some form of non-duality. It doesn't mean that they're not there yet. They're still locked into an imaginal symbolic code, but we should be listening to them and taking them seriously as manifestations of who we really are, is basically my argument.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's really it. That's the argument. And how to think impossibly, as I talk about it, is basically not reducing impossible phenomena back to one's own religious beliefs or to one's own scientific paradigm. It's letting the phenomena exist and speak and listen to it. And by listening to it, I don't mean believing it. I don't mean taking it literally. I mean seeing it as a symbolic kind of code of something that's happening that is speaking about something, probably something else that's not there, not apparent.
Yeah, and here again, I think you're kind of describing that the mind wants to grab it. They want to take it into language or whatever, which it is language, but it wants to somehow, is it that we want to translate it into what we already understand, and that's exactly what we shouldn't do? Is that your point?
Yeah, because I think what impossible phenomena are doing is they're pushing us outside of our story and outside of our paradigm, outside of our worldview. And we're trying to always come back to the worldview and reassert the worldview. And I just think that's a mistake. because these things are going to continue to happen. They happen to lots of people, including your dad, obviously. And we then shame them and we say, oh, that didn't happen. Or your dad was imagining those things. Or no, he wasn't. He wasn't imagining those things. He really was having those experiences. But we don't have a culture, at least in my own experience, in which we can integrate those things and affirm them in a way that they're part of this broader reality.
Yeah. And that degree to which we somehow have to exclude it is the degree to which I think we're, I would say, hypnotized by a mindset of materialism.
And it's not, unfortunately, it's not just materialism. It's also religion, by the way. I mean, you brought up the context of possession. I mean, these are often demons, as the religious believer will say. I'm like, oh, that's just more shaming. It's just like putting suffering on top of suffering. And of course, the phenomenon may itself appear as a demon. I'm not denying that, but it's not a demon. It's again, it's us, I think. And my joke is I've never met a demon that didn't look like a suffering human being. And I haven't. I really haven't. I have yet to see a possession case that didn't look like a suffering human being who was trying to speak and trying to articulate whatever the suffering is or whatever the trauma is. And they couldn't. And so it appears as a possession case.
Yeah. That's quite powerful. That actually touched me a little bit when you said that. And I want to also see if we can.
Hans, maybe something to add there is I am not imagining that the human being is in control. I don't think Hans or Jeff are in charge of this. We are not sovereign here. And so when I refer to the superhuman, I don't mean some kind of macho man in tights who can't be penetrated. That's not what I mean. I mean some greater mind at large that is precisely not the ego, not the social ego, not the social identity, and who often speaks to our social identities through dreams and through symbolic codes because it has to. It's not part of our language, our languages. It's not part of our mathematics. It doesn't inhabit those. It's not limited to those expressions, as it were.
Mm-hmm. I just get the sense that, and I guess it's religious language. I don't mean it to be religious language, but it so much seems like God reaching out or something like that.
Yeah,
or
it's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I get in trouble a lot because I want to affirm people's experience of God too. It's like, yeah, that's actually how people experience this. And God is a word for these moments that transcend or that exceed our normal ways of being and thinking and experiencing.
Yeah.
I don't mind religious language, Hans, at all. I mean, I don't mind God language at all. But I just don't want to restrict human beings who don't have that language. I think are also experiencing these things, and I want to affirm it all.
Yeah. I really like that, by the way. I love both and language because I think you said in the beginning, science is amazing. And I think that's true. Science is freaking awesome and it's incomplete and it's only one, reality tunnel or whatever you want to call it. There's something here in this whole thing of, imagination, consciousness being primary. I've started to read this book by Rob Burbea, who is a Buddhist teacher. And he talks about this Buddhist concept of, I think it's called construction or fabrication, that, it's all fabricated. There is something to me also to be said. And of course, I want to hear what you think about that. Is it that though, for me, all of these things point to non-dualities. I really feel resonance with what you're saying, which is the non-separateness of everything. There's distinctions, but there's not separation.
Yeah.
Do you also see that there's this non-duality maybe of perception and creation, that is not two things? It is just this whole perception creation soup. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I do. I get pushed a lot by colleagues who say that the appearance is the reality. The apparition is precisely how reality is appearing. And so it's not that there's some kind of vision and then there's something behind the vision that's speaking through it. It's that, no, the reality is speaking through the vision. I don't, I suspect that's true. I mean, but when we talk about non-duality, we're talking about philosophy. We're making a truth claim. And I think we should. I think we should go in precisely that direction. But that's exactly where humanists and historians don't go.
Mhm.
They don't go to the philosophical truth claim. That's not allowed. But it's obviously what human beings do. I mean, it's what religious people do. It's what they've done for, millennia. My joke is that the Buddha, when he taught that there is no self and that all things are impermanent, that wasn't just for people living in Nepal in the 5th century.
Yeah.
That was a normative truth claim that was as true for 21st century Americans or Dutch people as it was people living in North India in the 5th century BCE.
And you said earlier a similar thing that, the humanities are not talking about reality anymore. Is this what you're trying to grab them by the balls, so to speak, and say, hey, be more brave, be more,
Yeah.
how do you see?
Yeah. So there's two different issues here. There's this truth issue, this philosophical impulse that I think is at the base of this. But there's also, I don't want to speak too banally of it, but there's a marketing issue. There's a the humanities are dismissed now and defunded, and I think we have a horrible time telling people what it is we do, because what we actually do is not that exciting. And we're usually the bummer in the room. We're usually saying what's wrong with the system, and which is always correct. This is the thing. It's like, it's not that these methods are wrong. It's that there isn't an affirmative reason or powerful vision at the root of them. There's a critique, which is really important, and it's always the case, but there isn't an affirming vision.
Hmm.
And this is why I love religion, is because it has both. It has both the critique and the affirming vision, and I want us to do both as well. My joke, Hans, is like, at least in the States now, the end of October, we had Halloween, and there were 50, 60 kids at my door, and half of them were dressed up as superhumans, and nobody was dressed up as a professor of religion.
Yeah.
Nobody.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what is going on there? What is wrong with us? Why do we keep framing what we do in the academy as completely boring and as outside? Because actually the word superhuman is ours. We came up with it. I can go on all day about how that's part of the humanities. And even something like superhero comics, a very American creation in the 30s and 40s, is rooted deeply in humanities and in Victorian psychical research and in parapsychology and all kinds of fascinating things that we could affirm if we had the courage to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you said this also, we don't. And you said earlier that for you, it's also about the future, looking at the future. And this is a Nietzschean trope, I think, and he wasn't the only one who said something like about the superhuman. One of the things I really like about you is, I don't know where I read it or heard about it, but that you're actually quite optimistic about the future. And I find that so refreshing, because there's so much apocalyptic. I mean, if you read the news this week, it gets a little bit iffy sometimes. I'm granted that, but I really love your optimism. I don't know if you can say a few words about your optimism.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about visions of the future, they're always dystopian.
Yeah.
They always suck. We're going to get killed by AI robots, or the future is really bad. It's really bleak. And again, what I love about a lot of religious visions of the future, the eschatologies, is they're generally very positive, very cosmic. And ultimately, I'm of a magical persuasion. I think if we imagine a future that is negative and sucks, we're going to get a future that's negative and sucks. And if we imagine a future that's positive and life affirming and cosmic, we're going to get a future that's life affirming and positive and cosmic. And so I'm like, let's imagine, let's create a future that we want to live in, and that we can talk about. And I understand that that's utopian, but so what?
Mm.
I mean, I think we should be utopian, sometime.
Mm. That's extremely cool, because when I was kind of digesting the questions I wanted to ask you, one of the questions that came up was, are there ethical implications of this worldview? And now what you're saying is, and correct me if that's not what you're saying, but what I'm hearing you say is, yes, we have to take responsibility for our imagination. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think there's a deep ethical impulse here. I mean, one of my friends he used to joke with me all the time. I used to talk a lot about the Mothman, this American monster. And I'd show up at a conference and he'd say, "Oh, the Mothman cometh." And he would like poke at me and he'd like, "Jeff, what does a 9-foot bat jumping on the hood of a car have to do with anything positive?" And I thought about it, and not for long, by the way. And basically, I think it's about human experience. It's about affirming other people. And if they have an experience of a 9-foot bat jumping on their 57 Chevy, then that's what happened. And that's grander than this boring flatland that we keep talking about, that we keep imagining. So I think there's a deep ethical impulse in just affirming one another's experiences, and whether they fit into the social system or not. And usually they don't, at least the ones I want to talk about, the ones I want to.
Yeah. I find it extremely, refreshing. Please continue. Yeah.
Yeah. And, again, I can't speak about the European context, but certainly the American context. The culture certainly produces some pretty horrible things, but it also has this ability to reflect back on itself and to make fun of itself and to humor and power. And the paranormal is itself a social phenomena in which I think the society is reflecting back on itself and essentially taking apart itself. And I think that's very powerful. And I think this is why the humanist critical theories are so relevant here, because they help us think about how the social system is deconstructing itself. But they force us to think about the social system in much bigger ways than just society.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we need some form of mind or some form of consciousness to really, truly make sense of these things.
Yeah. Yeah. And for me, taking the flip seriously, as I have been, not just your book, but what your book is about, makes that possible for me. It makes so many of those things that are normally excluded all of a sudden possible. I really, really like that. I do want to ask one question about UFOs, okay? And of course, my poster is very on the nose, but I say it's cultural reference to the X-Files. Shut up! But I love it. Yeah, in a way, it doesn't make really, given our conversation just now, doesn't even really make sense to ask what they are, because that's exactly what we kind of, aren't supposed to do. But what are they? I won't ask that question, but maybe what I want to ask you is, do you take a slightly Jungian approach to UFOs? They are this circular.
Yeah. So I get in trouble with Jungians. I'm critical of Jung, but I also am very appreciative of him. The UFO. I mean, he wrote a really prescient book on UFOs in the late 50s. and I think it's wonderful. I think it's too Jungian. I don't think they're just mandalas in the sky, and it's not always about psychic wholeness. Um, but I think with the UFO phenomenon, I mean, we could talk about it. It goes back to this discussion of utopia or dystopia, and at least what's popular in the American media and politics is a very negative, nuts and bolts kind of threat narrative. It's we need to shoot these things down. These are threats to our pilots. These are, somehow it's military. Somehow, so there are very negative consequences or interpretations of the phenomena. If, however, you start with the experiencers who experience the UFO and who actually have these encounters, you realize that that's only part of the story. And that, sure, there's fear and there's terror and there's negativity involved, but there's also transformation and there's also a lot of paranormal stuff that goes on as well. And so you end up going down a rabbit hole. And this is what I love about the UFO is that it's a sort of it's what I call an entry drug. What's the right phrase?
Oh yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
it's a way to pull people in to this conversation and to get people talking about these bigger issues. And in the States, at least, I mean, look, they're talking about it in Congress. There have been bills on the floor, and so I think that's really positive and powerful. But I think eventually we have to bring in the experiencer, and we have to bring in the weird and the paranormal, because this is what the phenomena is also about. You can't understand the full phenomena without that. Um, you still need the sciences, you still need the astronomy, you still need the physics, you still need the extraterrestrial hypothesis, as it were, but you also need all the weird stuff that doesn't fit into those.
Yeah.
And that's what I love. My again, my joke about the UFO is if you know what a UFO is, you actually don't.
Yeah.
If you're certain about that it's just a fraud, then you're certainly wrong. But if you think it's just a threat or it's the Chinese or whatever, you're wrong as well. And so I love that about the topic.
Yeah. That's quite a quantum physical approach to UFOs, by the way.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, maybe. I mean, I think the UFO does things all the time that violate our physics. Pretty much any of it. On the other hand, it does a lot of things that do make sense in quantum physics or Einsteinian relativity or these other models. And so that's why, again, I love the phenomenon, is because it pushes us outside. It's just a hallucination or it's just a fraud. It pushes us into physics, as it were.
Mm. Yeah. One thing I'm getting from this conversation and also from your wish and your urge is that we need to listen to each other. Would you agree with that?
Mm-hmm. Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we need to have this conversation. And by having this conversation, I don't just mean a podcast. I mean, we need to talk about this in a really human and compassionate way, and really consider what each other's positions and not just dismiss them.
Yeah.
And so there's a kind of ethical impulse here. There's a kind of compassionate. I don't mean to be too moral about it, but that's really the message. Hey, let's talk. And if we have a conclusion, it's convictions are not very convincing, but conversations, open-ended conversations are.
Yeah. I super agree with that. I have one final question for you, but before that, I want to ask you something else about, kind of what are you now excited about? I know that you are having this project of the super story. Would you like to share a bit about that?
Yeah. I mean, the super story, it's a trilogy, and a trilogy is what an author talks about when he or she or they do not want to die. It's like, yeah, I'm writing a trilogy. It just basically means, this big project. Embarrassingly, I finished the first volume, and the second and third volumes are pretty much done as well. And they go through the history of science. The first one's about physics, by the way, and the second one's about evolutionary biology, and the third one is about technology and the UFO, by the way. And the point, the broader argument is that science has completely changed the game in terms of how we have these anomalous experiences, and that the scientists themselves often have these anomalous experiences and create their science out of these experiences. So it's not just that people don't go to purgatory or see the Blessed Virgin. They go to another dimension or they see the cosmos. That's part of the argument. But the other argument is, well, the physicists themselves are turning to mystical literature and talking about poltergeist experiences. They're having these experiences, and this is informing their quantum physics or their relativity or whatever the case might be. So it's a kind of a both way approach of the esoteric informing the scientific, but also the scientific informing the esoteric.
Mm-hmm. That sounds very interesting. I look forward to ordering that. Yeah. Thank you for that. And nothing embarrassing about it. I love your stuff, so I'm sure I'll love that too. And then the very last question that I tend to ask most of my guests is the following. It's a bit of a thought experiment, which is a little bit apocalyptic, but only if it depends on your timeline, I guess. So the idea is that, more ships are being sent to foreign countries, whatever happens, but global society just completely does, go to shit. And there's only a very small pocket of humans left, and they have to kind of repopulate the earth. And, every trace of our current society is just gone, except for one flash drive. And that flash drive just happens to have a podcast on it, but it's really damaged. So it only has the last 5 minutes of the podcast, which is, of course, this podcast. And so the question is, what, if any, message would you have to those future humans? No pressure.
Yeah, that's a lot of pressure. I mean, I guess the message, that I do want to, I leave in all my books is that any kind of future orientation should be about the whole globe or the whole planet, and not just a particular community or a particular culture. And it should also be about more than the planet. It should be about the entire universe, the entire cosmos. And so it's that kind of double message: is how do we think about an orientation for the species that is global, but not just global, not just Earth-based, but it is cosmic in some sense. And it's that both and that I personally would leave such a community with. My fear is that they're going to come up with some exclusive, certainty, again.
Yeah. Yeah. Amen to that, if I may say that. I will give you the last word if you want to say anything else, but for me, just thank you very much for your time. I'm really blessed that you are able to come on, and I really enjoyed the conversation. Anything else that you want to add before we round it up?
Well, one of the things I'm just thinking in my head, there was this wonderful London-based Broadway play called We Will Rock You I saw years ago, and it involves the future. Go back to your question. And in the future, all music is written by basically AI, basically computers. But that there's this prophet figure who arises, this young kid, but every prophecy he receives is a lyric from a Queen song.
Oh,
but he learns to produce music, without the computer, by listening to these extraordinary states. And I guess that's what I'm trying to say is let's write rock and roll again, through our altered states and not through our computers or through our AI.
Yeah, again, amen to that. Thanks a lot, Jeffrey, Mr. Kripal, and have a beautiful rest of your day.
Thanks, Hans. Thank you.